He had been told how this would end, not guessed, not feared, told by his mother, by the oracle, by the particular quality of silence the gods use when they have already decided. He went anyway. There was no surprise in his face. That is the part they always leave out. The arrow was Paris's. The hand that guided it was Apollo's. The heel was a mother's failed attempt at the impossible. None of that is the story. The story is the choice that came long before any of it. His mother was a sea goddess, powerful enough to love him, not powerful enough to save him. She dipped him in the Styx, the river that unmakes mortality. She held him by the heel. That is the version everyone knows. What they leave out? She already knew it wouldn't work. No mortal survives the god's attention unchanged. She was buying time. There was a prophecy, not vague, specific. 2 paths, named clearly, a long life, unknown, unremarkable, safe, or a short life, violent, witnessed, and remembered for as long as men remembered anything at all. Thetis hid him on the island of Skyros, dressed as a girl among girls. The plan was, if they cannot find him, they cannot take him to war. The plan was, if there is no war for him, there is no short life. It was not a foolish plan. It simply underestimated how much he wanted to be found. Odysseus brought gifts, cloth and jewelry for the women of the court, and 1 sword. Achilles took the sword before anyone else moved. That was the end of the disguise. That was the end of the long life. He chose it in the length of a reach. 1,000 ships. Greeks had assembled the largest fleet the world had yet seen. For what everyone called a war over a woman, and what it actually was a war over power and pride wearing a woman's name. Achilles came, not for Helen, not for Agamemnon, for the name that would outlast the living of any life he might otherwise have led. He understood the transaction completely. For 9 years they fought. 9 years of grinding, attritional, costly warfare, the kind that nobody remembers as glorious while they are inside it. In the 10th year, Agamemnon took Briseis. She had been Achilles' prize. The word they used was prize. He took her because he could. Because he was king and Achilles was not. Because sometimes power demonstrates itself not through need, but through the proof of the act. Achilles reached for his sword. In his mind, the decision had already been made. Agamemnon would die. The war would end. The fleet would sail home leaderless and broken. He had already seen all of it. I came down, not as messenger, not as advisor. I grabbed him by the hair and pulled him back. He was the only mortal I ever stopped that way, with my hands. I have thought about why. I have not arrived at an answer that satisfies me entirely. I told him, sheathe the sword. He did. That is the detail that changes everything else about Achilles. He was capable of restraint. He chose, in that moment, to be capable of it. What followed was not loss of control. What followed was a choice. He withdrew, not from cowardice, from calculation. Let the Greeks bleed without him. Let Agamemnon discover what his army was worth when its best weapon had been insulted into silence. He was right about what would happen. He was also wrong about what it would cost. There was Patroclus. There had always been Patroclus. They had grown up together, trained together, sailed together, slept beneath the same dark sky for 10 years of war. The popular version of this story is careful about what it calls them. The Greeks were not careful. The Greeks understood exactly what they were to each other. The Greeks fell back. Day after day they fell back. The Trojans pushed them to the ships, the water at their backs. Nowhere left to retreat. Agamemnon sent envoys, gifts, apologies wrapped in the language of kings who have learned that pride is expensive when the war is going badly. Achilles refused. Patroclus asked to borrow the armor. His reasoning, The Trojans would see Achilles' armor and believe Achilles had returned. It would buy the Greeks time, stop the retreat. It was not a foolish plan. It simply underestimated Apollo. For a while, it worked. The Trojans fell back before the armor they thought was Achilles. Patroclus pushed them. Too far, too long, too deep into territory Achilles had specifically told him not to enter. Achilles had said, push them back from the ships, then return. Apollo struck him first, from behind, unseen, stunned him, stripped his helmet, left him open for Hector's spear. Patroclus died, not wearing his own armor, not in his own name, wearing the face of someone else, carrying a borrowed identity into a death that was meant to be someone else's. When the news came, Achilles did not weep. Not at first. He went very still, the kind of still that comes before something changes in a person that will never change back. He went back to the war, not for Agamemnon, not for Greece, not for any principle a king would recognize. He went back because Patroclus was dead and Hector had killed him, and Achilles intended to stand over Hector's body the way Hector had stood over Patroclus. That is not glory, that is grief wearing armor. 3 times Hector ran around the walls of Troy. Not cowardice. Hector was not a coward. Survival. For a little while, in the presence of something that intended to end him. Hector died, and Achilles felt nothing. The grief that had sent him back to the battlefield did not lift when Hector fell. Patroclus was still dead. Nothing was undone. He dragged the body, for days, around the walls of Troy, past the gates where Hector's family watched from above. The gods were disturbed by this. I was disturbed by this. Even among those who choose violence as language, there are sentences that go too far. And then Priam came, alone, at night, to the tent of the man who had killed his son. He kissed Achilles' hands. He asked for the body. They wept together. That is the sentence I return to. Achilles and Priam, the man who had destroyed Troy and the king who watched it happen, wept together for what they had each lost. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, recognition. The only moment in 10 years of that war where 2 people looked at each other and saw something true. Apollo had not forgotten. Achilles had killed his priest. Achilles had dragged the body of a man Apollo favored. Apollo did not forget insults. None of them did. Paris drew the bow. Paris was not a warrior. He knew it. Everyone knew it. He was an instrument. Apollo needed a hand that could hold a bow and aim it where he pointed. He had been told how this would end. He saw the arrow. Some accounts say he spoke before he fell. I was not close enough to hear. I was not certain I wanted to. Thetis knew before the messenger arrived. She had always known. Everything she had done, the river, the disguise, the armor, was not an attempt to prevent it. It was the record of a mother who refused to do nothing while the thing she could not stop was already in motion. He chose it in the length of a reach. A boy, on an island, extending his hand toward a sword among gifts that were a test. Every choice after that was consequence, and he knew it, and he reached anyway. What does it mean to choose a short life knowing it is short? Not recklessness, not arrogance, not the stupidity of a young man who believes death belongs to other people. He knew death was coming for him specifically. He had a name and a date and a place. He chose it anyway. I have spent a long time with that. He got what he paid for. 3,000 years of his name in every language that ever found its way to a page. The other path, the long life, the unnamed man, left nothing. Not worse, not better, nothing. Is that a fair trade? I am not the one who made it. His name is still spoken. The man who insulted him is not remembered outside of a footnote that begins with Achilles. The king who sent him to die requires explanation when mentioned. Achilles requires no explanation. I stopped him once. I pulled him back from a killing that would have ended the war and made him nothing. I have wondered since whether I did that for Greece or for the story, whether those were ever different things. History calls it myth, I call it memory.